Hello, and welcome to Return to Regalia, an Underland Chronicles reread podcast. I'm Oona.
I'm John.
Today we'll be covering chapters 12 and 13 of The Curse of the Warmbloods, in which the questers set off into the jungle and meet Hamnet, Hazard, and Frill. But before we get into it, I'd like to give a shout out to everyone who actually went and checked their copies of the book after last week's episode when Nate and I were discussing whether remedy and cure in chapter 11 was a typo or not. Last week, Nate and I were discussing whether there was a typo in the book because in chapter 2, the prophecy says remedy and wrong entwine. And in chapter 11, in my copy of the book and in the audiobook, it says remedy and cure entwine. So we were trying to figure out if that was a typo or if it was intentional, because I'd never noticed it before. But it seems that it actually was a typo, and it got corrected in later editions of the book. So
Interesting.
There goes my theory about how Narissa was secretly remixing Sandwich's prophecies.
That would have been amazing if, Narissa was just, editing Sandwich's thoughts.
Would have been cool, but alas, I got some messages from people that said in their copies of the books it was corrected to remedy and wrong. So that's the actual prophecy, is remedy and wrong entwine. But yeah, thanks for everyone who messaged me about that. Also, a huge shout out to Tumblr user Quohotos for drawing some scientist bats for me, because in the last few chapters, it describes in Naviv's lab how there are some bat scientists, and I asked for someone to draw me a bat scientist, and Quohotos drew me two. So if you want to check out that art, you can visit returntoregalia.tumblr.com and search for the tag podcast fan art. Thanks so much for the art. It's beautiful. All right, are you ready to get into today's chapters?
Yes, I've got some thoughts on especially Hamnet and Hazard.
Absolutely, I would expect nothing less. I also have so many thoughts, and there's a lot to cover, so let's get right into it. Where we left off, Gregor had just yelled at the Regalians to give the rats flea powder in exchange for their help on the quest. Chapter 12 starts with the council ultimately agreeing to send the flea powder, but some of them are so upset about it that they're crying. The narration says, "The way they hated the rats, the degree to which they would sacrifice to have them dead, was beyond anything in Gregor's experience. That guy who had left the meeting, would he really rather see everybody dead than help some rats survive? Apparently the answer was yes." So this is kind of like something that we've talked about before on the podcast, is Gregor he's such a foreigner to this Regalian society and how much they hate the rats. And I think that this is a good little summary of that, of his experience of looking in at them and kind of having a different perspective from them. It's just a really explicit description of the Regalians here. The Regalians bring out a map of the Underland to chart their journey. Just a side note, Tumblr user Deliver the Light drew an excellent map of the Underland that matches what's described here pretty much exactly. I reblogged it to the Return to Regalia Tumblr with the tag Underland map if you want to find it.
Yes, we've talked about that in previous books, I think, how there's not an official map of the Underland, which is still baffling to me.
Yeah, it would have been really cool if they had included a map in the inside cover of the book or something.
I think it's one of those, I can't remember who it is. There's some author out there, I know, I don't even remember what it is, but they have talked about how, they don't draw maps of fictional places because it, makes the world more limited. If there's no map, you can imagine whatever you want to be in that universe, but if you have the map on paper, yeah, it's cool to see all of those details, but then it also ends where the page ends.
Yeah.
So I feel like maybe Suzanne Collins describes the same thing. She never made a map of the districts in Hunger Games, even though I know many people will have imagined okay, where each district lines up with what geographic region of what is currently North America.
Yeah, I feel since the movies have come out, people have been making maps, and maybe there was some official map made, but I'm not sure that Suzanne Collins made that.
I'd highly doubt it. It was probably more of a movie production at that point, or a studio production.
Yeah, no, I like that. I mean, I really like the map that Deliver the Light drew on Tumblr, but I also enjoy the fact that there's not an official, charting of the territories. We just get this vague description here, and that's enough to visualize kind of the scope of the Underland. I think it makes it more fantastical when we don't know the edges of the Underland. We don't know how far away things truly are from each other, and how big the Underland really is and how big the waterway is. But then I have read other books that have maps, and I think it makes sense for them to have maps. Like, did you ever read Leviathan by Scott Westerfeld?
I read the first one. I didn't read the sequels, but I did read the first one.
Okay, do you remember the map in that one?
Yes, and it's got all the steampunk vibes.
Yeah.
And the way it's laid out is very, because like there's so much traveling in that book.
Yes.
That where like the traveling and journey is part of the story.
Yeah, and it also takes place in the real world, so
yes.
it's
an alternate universe version,
yes.
but still
but it's the same
continents, same countries, all of that.
Yeah, but it's like each of the countries is depicted by either like an animal or a machine, because that's what the book is about. And
there's a Tasmanian tiger in there.
Yeah, it's like a steampunk retelling of World War One. And then in the Six of Crows books, they have a map of where all of that stuff is, I'm pretty sure. Or maybe I'm just thinking of...
Shadow and Bone, they have a map.
Okay, Shadow and Bone,
they have a map.
Yes.
I feel like then it would be redundant to have one in Six of Crows, but at least the overarching universe, there is a map that exists.
Yes. And I think that makes sense too, because that's a lot about like inter-country like power struggles, and it's important to know like what all the countries are.
And Gregor has that too, but like they're all simplified to the animals that exist there, so it doesn't really need the like geographical divides.
Right. And I think it's also good if you don't lay out a map of all of the species ahead of time, because then you can like introduce new species and new environments. Like before this book, we didn't know that the mice were like major players in this universe, and we didn't know that the jungle was a thing. So Suzanne Collins can introduce these things halfway into the series instead of being limited by, if she had a map in the first book, she would have been stuck with what was on that map.
Yeah, because like for as much as we've talked about how much it's very clear Suzanne Collins had planned out the series, like she obviously hadn't planned the entire thing out. There were clearly parts where like, oh, not even clearly parts, but there definitely were parts that were come up with later rather than like when she was first writing the very first book.
Yes. So Gregor gets a good look at this map. Solovet mentions a path potentially blocked by the Cutters, who Temp tells Gregor are ants who hate Warmbloods. Mange asks how they're supposed to find the Vineyard of Eyes in the huge jungle, and Nerissa reveals that she's arranged a guide for them. Apparently, she set up the meeting a long time ago, and she knows the guide will help them because she had a vision of him and Gregor.
I just love Nerissa. I feel like she's a slept-on character overall.
Yes.
I feel like she doesn't get the praise she deserves. She's so much fun. I love how she interacts with other people and how other people view her. But, like, her role in the series is so important, yet also, like, it never feels unearned. And she never feels like a caricature. I feel like she's a character they very easily could have made almost like the person like who's floating up in the clouds, who's kind of neurotic and not really seen as credible. It could have been very easy to make it like a cliched version of that character, but she always feels very authentic.
Huge agree from me. Yeah, Nerissa is underrated, and she is so real, even though she's like, no one takes her seriously, and she's kind of like not all there all the time, but like her motivations are so solid, and her belief in her own visions is really, really cool. But just because she believes in herself doesn't mean everyone does. Lapblood says, I thought I had a vision once, but it was only some very bad mushrooms, which is great.
She's been hanging out with Ripred.
Yeah.
Got the sarcasm on point.
Vicus backs Nerissa up, and Solovet asks who the guide is, but Nerissa won't reveal his name. Probably because she knows it'll cause drama.
Yeah.
If she reveals it ahead of time.
I'm curious how much of Nerissa's vision she's like cognizant of, because I remember at the end of Prophecy of Bane, like she wasn't. She functions as a proper oracle where she like can see the future, but she doesn't always understand it.
Mm-hmm.
So she didn't understand the prophecy of Bane until like right in the moment when she saved Gregor and Ares' life because of how they saved the Bane as an infant. Like she didn't understand that prophecy, even though she clearly had the vision beforehand. I feel like it's very possible. I don't remember if it's ever addressed. It's definitely not addressed in this one because we only get it from Hamlet's perspective. But I think it's very possible when she predicted this all those years ago, she didn't really understand the importance of Hamnet, or maybe even now she doesn't really know how much of a fraught relationship the royal family has.
Right, because she was a kid when he ran away.
Infant, yeah, she was also, well, not an infant, but she was very, very young.
Yeah, she must have been like 7 or 8.
At most.
Yeah.
Because it was, 12 years ago, I think it says?
He ran away 10 years ago.
10 years ago.
And she would have to be 16 to be queen. So she's like...
16 or 17.
She's maybe 16 or 17, I think. Yeah, I wonder if she doesn't reveal his name here because she knows it'll cause drama, or maybe she's afraid that will make people not believe in her as much because they all think that Hamnet is dead, so she doesn't want to say, Hamnet's gonna meet you, because then everyone, like, won't believe her.
They either won't believe her or they won't want to meet Hamlet.
Right.
Hamlet,
yeah.
As we'll see. There's another point that I think supports my theory, but we'll get to it when we get to chapter 13.
Yes, so. Perfect. Can't wait. Ripred wonders if Nerissa dreamt up this guide, and Nerissa says, then you will be none the worse than you are at present, and says the place they'll meet the guide, the Arch of Tantalus, is as good a place as any to start their journey.
Valid.
Yeah, I love that she's like, well, don't believe me then. This is still a good spot to start the quest. Yeah, I don't know. She's just really cool.
And she doesn't even know it. She just says that because it's the truth.
Yeah, I think that's my favorite part about Nerissa, is that she doesn't say anything to, like, show off to anyone else. She's, like, one of the very few egoless characters in this series.
She's always just sincere.
Yeah, like, she doesn't know how to be insincere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, love that about her. Ripred says the arch is top-notch if you ignore all the skeletons, and everyone else seems to agree. Nerissa basically tells them the guide will be there and it's up to you whether or not you meet him. And Gregor thinks she's brave for standing up to the rats. Plus, he owes her for saving his life at the end of the Bane quest, so he tells everyone that he trusts Nerissa's judgment.
I like how he doesn't actually, like, he says he trusts Nerissa's judgment. He admits he doesn't necessarily trust her. He owes her one. He likes Nerissa and is grateful for how she saved his life and Ares' life last
Exactly.
book. So,
yeah, I don't think...
Even he's skeptical of this a little bit.
Yeah, Gregor is kind of skeptical and doesn't completely believe in her supposed powers. But yeah, I like that he's just like, well, I like Nerissa. She's nice. I might as well back her up here.
Because even the interpretation of the prophecy that Nerissa gave last book that, like, saved them, that wasn't, like, predicting anything, which is what she's doing here. That was just putting a spin on what had happened and saying that was, and making the case that it was the better interpretation. Here, she's like, no, this is going to happen, and not even just at some point. It will be exactly 8 hours from now, so get moving.
Yeah.
Like, that's a lot more to expect.
Yeah, isn't that wild that she's just like, on this exact day, in 8 hours, he's gonna be there.
I think that's the other reason I like Nerissa, is that her prophecies differ from Bartholomew's in that, like, they're specific.
Right.
They're not, like, meant to be confusing.
Exactly.
Or complicated. Like, authorial intent is present here.
Yeah.
Which we don't have with Sandwich's prophecies.
No. Yeah, Nerissa's like, be at this spot at this time on this day, and there you go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When Gregor backs Nerissa up, Ripred says, that's that then, and shoots Gregor a look that seems to add, you idiot, which I love. The rats set off first, since they have to go on foot, but Gregor has some time to prepare. He asks an Underlander for something to write a letter on, and he ends up scrawling out a blotted message to his mom that says, I'm doing what I think you would do if I were the one with the plague, trying to find the cure. Please don't be mad. Which just breaks my heart. Because, like, he's right that if he were the one with the plague, Grace would definitely be out there trying to find the cure. But it's not the same, because he's the kid and she's the mom. And that doesn't matter to Gregor, but...
It's gonna matter to Grace.
Yeah, and she's gonna be blaming herself and be worried about him. And yeah, the letter that he writes her is really heartbreaking to me. Marith appears with a pack full of supplies for Gregor that he got from the museum. I love the detail about Marith knowing what Gregor needs on quests because he's been on 2 with him now. I love that. I love their friendship.
I will admit, when we were reading the first book, I had forgotten about Marith entirely, and I was still baffled that he was your favorite character in the series. I still don't agree, but I definitely get it at this point because he is such a
Yes.
sweet guy and he has a great rapport.
Oh my god, yes. Yeah, this scene is actually like top Marith scenes to me, like top 5 Marith moments, honestly. Because it turns out that Marith did actually do a great job on the supplies. The pack contains all the Underland questing essentials: flashlights, batteries, duct tape, and a bottle of water.
No root beer though.
No root beer, unfortunately. There's this cute little exchange where Marith asks about the water bottle because it says it's from glaciers and he doesn't know what those are, but he has heard of ice before. He asks if glacier water has special benefits and Gregor doesn't think so, but when Marith looks disappointed, he adds that it's probably really clean and points out that the label says extra pure. Marith is satisfied by that because he's certain pure water will be hard to find in the jungle. Which he is right about. It ends up being kind of a major challenge they face later in the book, is trying to find water. But I just love this part where Gregor is like, I don't know, I don't think it's special, but then Marith is like, aw.
Oh.
And Gregor is like, well, actually, yeah, it kind of is.
He has to pretend the marketing is factual.
Yeah.
He has to buy into the lie.
Yeah, I just love that exchange of like Marith asking what glaciers are and Gregor has to explain it. I think that that's really, really cute for some reason. Just Marith admitting that he doesn't know and like asking Gregor what they are and like learning something new. And Gregor like kind of making something up, but not really, to like try and make Marith feel better. It's great.
Do they ever talk about technology? Like
Not
like
really.
vehicles or telephones or
I don't think so.
television?
I feel like the closest that we get is when in the second book, Gregor is telling Ares about airplanes because Ares is talking about how no bat has ever crossed the waterway by itself, and Gregor is talking about how like Charles Lindbergh crossed the Atlantic Ocean in a plane, and he like talks about planes for a little bit, but he doesn't really talk about like technology or anything with any of the other Underlanders. It is mentioned in the first book that Vicus and Luxa know about electricity. So they must have like studied it or have some sort of like knowledge of it. And Gregor, they know how Gregor's like flashlights and batteries
That's
work.
true.
Gregor like hands out flashlights to people at certain points.
That's right.
So they know how those work. But I would love a scene where Gregor tries to like explain the internet to Luxa or something. Finally, Marith pulls out a pack of bubble gum. He admits he doesn't know what it is, but it has a sense of happiness about it, he says, and he thinks it'll remind Gregor of home. Like I said, this is maybe like my favorite Marith moment ever. Just the fact that he saw this thing and he has no idea what it is, but it seems happy and he thinks that maybe it'll bring Gregor joy on his journey, and he's just like, I don't know what it is, but here, have it. Like, that is so adorable. I love Marith.
He's also right in his assessment too. I don't think I've had bubblegum specifically in like over a decade.
Oh, same, yeah. If I have gum, it's like mint.
Yeah, it's like chewing gum.
Yeah, and then Gregor does say, like, my sister Lizzie loves this stuff, so it does remind him of home. That's really nice. And there's a great scene later on with the bubblegum, too, which is just awesome. Underlanders bring a bunch of food for Gregor, and he convinces Marith to stay and eat with him. One of the dishes they're served is Ripred's favorite shrimp and cream sauce, and it makes Gregor think about how the humans are starving out the rats. He asks Marith about it, and Marith admits that it does bother him how Solovet is starving the innocent pups as well as the big rats. He tells Gregor that the Underland is a kill or be killed world, and he knows it's hard for Gregor to understand that. Marith ponders what life would be like if the Underlanders didn't always have to be ready to go to war, but he says it seems like a fairy tale. I love this part when Gregor is asking Marith to tell him what he would do if there weren't wars to fight, and Marith like can't even think of what he'd be doing if he weren't a soldier.
The fact that Marith is like also kind of actively retired and discharged at this point is like even more heartbreaking. We're like, that is kind of his reality at this point. Like he's still living in the war, but he's not participating in it. But yet he still doesn't really know what his life will entail at this point.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting how Marith says, like, of course it bothers me that Solovet is doing this, but he has this perspective of, like, that's what needs to be done, because this is the world they live in. And also, like, on a different scale, he's a soldier and he has to follow orders, which ends up being kind of a big theme in the books, especially later books, when Gregor takes on a more military role under Solovet. he has to learn in book 5 a whole lot about how like a soldier has to follow orders even if he disagrees with them. And I think that we're getting a little taste of that theme here with Marith. When an Underlander comes to clean up the meal, Gregor asks if he could take the leftover shrimp and cream sauce with him. There's another cute little exchange where the Underlander, Lucent, is confused by Gregor asking them to, quote, stick it in a bag until Marith suggests an airtight wineskin. Gregor gives Marith the letter for his mom and heads down to the docks. Vicus is there, and he says he's accompanying them to the Arch of Tantalus. Gregor almost asks where Ares is before he realizes he's going to be flying on Nike.
Oh, that pulled at the heartstrings.
Yeah, so sad. Nike tells him, I am not as strong or as large as Ares, but I have a certain agility, and Gregor assures her that she's perfect. He asks if he can nap on her back, and he ends up lying on his side with Boots in his arms, Temp at his feet, and the shrimp and cream sauce under his head as a pillow. He says, fly you high to Dulcet, and falls asleep as they lift off. When he wakes up, they've made it to the Arch of Tantalus, which is made up of a pile of boulders in a clearing in the jungle. The narration describes the jungle as a mass of thick, ropey vines that's humming with life. All around the arch are piles of bones. Lapland voices her doubts about Nerissa, calling her a lunatic, and when Vicus defends her, Ripred says, you have to at least credit her with a certain instability. Remember when she told you I was plotting to take over the Fount with an army of lobsters? And Vicus says, you did try and take over the Fount with an army of lobsters. This is my absolute favorite Ripred fact. I need the backstory. I need to know, why was he invading the Fount? Why lobsters? Do the lobsters talk, or are they just regular lobsters?
Yes, after all, his favorite food is shrimp, a fellow crustacean.
Yeah, wait. Oh my god. So, like, how did he get the lobsters?
Did he ally himself with the lobsters and then just not tell them he was going to eat them for dinner later that night?
Yeah, like, I want to know, are the lobsters big also? And they are like, how did he convince them? Yeah, I have so many questions, and I think that the joke is that we just never find out what this was about, and we're not supposed to, but, like, I think it's so funny that Ripred apparently, sometime before Nerissa was born, had, like, this crazy scheme to try and take over the Fount. And, like, it's never even said if that was, like, in a time when rats were at peace with the humans or not, or if he was, was he literally trying to take over the Fount, or was he just, like, doing it as a joke or something? I have no idea.
It's the noodle incident of the series. You know, like Calvin and Hobbes?
No.
Oh.
I mean, I have read it, but...
There's a recurring joke where there was a noodle incident that was, like, the worst thing Calvin's ever done. There's never been any details as to what that means. It's just the noodle incident.
That's fun.
So, like, if there's ever, like an unseen event that happened that's, like, referred to, but we never actually get information on, that's what that is.
I love that trope, actually.
It's so much fun.
Yeah, no. I didn't know that was from Calvin and Hobbes, but yes, I love when that trope happens and other stuff. Ripred admits he did try and take over the Fount with an army of lobsters, but it was years before Nerissa was born, so they can't really trust her sense of time when it comes to scheduling a meeting.
That's true. Instead of predicting the future, she can also just predict the past.
Right. This reminds me of how in the Raven Cycle, the psychic mom, Mora, talks about her clairvoyance as, like, remembering, but in the other direction.
Yep.
Like, remembering is for the past, and, like, clairvoyance is for the future, but it's, like, time is a circle, and it's all the same, and I feel like Nerissa has, like, a similar thing going on here. So Lavette agrees with Ripred, and Gregor wonders what's up with her and Vicus disagreeing so much lately. Just then, Boots throws her ball high into the air, and Gregor follows it with his flashlight beam as it disappears into the mouth of a colossal lizard. It's Frill!
I love how there's a, 3-year-old at this point?
I think she's still 2.
She's still 2. Boy, this has been a hell of a year for them.
Yeah, I don't think they talk about her turning 3.
Yeah, that would have been an event. But she's still 2. But she's been on, this is a 3rd life-threatening journey.
Right. I love how in every book, it's, for every quest, Gregor, Boots, and Temp are the only ones who have been on every single quest.
They're the constants.
Yeah, because, like, Ares isn't in this one, Luxa isn't in this one until later.
Ripred wasn't in Prophecy of Bane.
Exactly. But it's Gregor, Boots, and Temp are, like, the golden trio. Chapter 13 starts with a description of the lizard. It's iridescent blue-green and 15 feet tall. Temp pulls up short, but Boots just climbs off his back and points at the lizard, saying, "You eated my ball!" Gregor tries to go after her, but he trips on a skeleton. Temp opens his wings and flies at the lizard, but just ends up tangled in the vines. The lizard opens its rainbow-colored ruff around its neck to make itself look bigger. And Boots is surprised, but instead of running away, she mimics the lizard by holding her arms above her head. A human starts laughing from somewhere behind the lizard, and an Underland man slides down its tail. He kneels in front of Boots and asks if she's a hisser too, and when she says, "No, I'm Boots, who you?" he introduces himself as Hamnet and his lizard friend as Frill. Boots says, "I is for iguana," and Gregor notes that iguana is like yak in that it features prominently in ABC books.
Yet she's probably never actually seen one.
Exactly. Hamnet asks Frill if there's any way to have Boots' ball back, and she coughs it up into his hand. He wipes it on his reptile skin clothing and holds it out to Boots. Gregor is hit with deja vu as he flashes back to Luxa kneeling in the arena and holding a ball out to Boots on their first day in the Underland. Hamnet looks so much like Luxa, Gregor knows they must be related. He looks back at the others and sees that the humans are standing completely still, like they've just seen a ghost, and Vicus has his arm around Solovet. Unlike Luxa did when she first met Boots, Hamnet gives the ball up easily and then stands to help Temp untangle his wings from the vines. He asks, "What bold crawler is it who flies in the face of a hisser?" And Temp introduces himself before he and Boots go off to play some more. I love this line of like, "What bold crawler flies in the face of a hisser?" Because truly Temp is like the bravest crawler.
Temp has done so much for the princess.
Yeah, like he's like ride or die for Boots, and I just love that. Even though he like totally misses and just gets tangled up, like he tried his best.
It's the effort, yeah.
That's what matters. Ripred says, "Oh look, it's Hamnet. He's not dead," and starts gnawing on a human skull. Hamnet says, "That's a nice touch," and Ripred replies, "I thought so. How've you been?" Which I just love. Like that whole exchange is just so good.
What phase is this at all?
Truly.
Is he ever taken aback? Was he even taken aback? I think he was a little taken aback when they dumped the Bane at his doorstep. But I feel like he was more shook by the fact that he was being asked to care for the Bane, rather than the fact that they left the Bane live.
Yes, exactly. He's pretty good at hiding his surprise if he has any.
He's so unflappable.
Yeah, he cannot be flapped.
Nope.
Hamnet replies he's been remarkably well, all things considered, and calls for a young boy to come join them. When the boy appears, Gregor immediately notes his appearance, which is a combination of Underland and Overland features. He has jet black curls, pale Underlander skin, and bright green eyes. Hamnet introduces him as his son, Hazard, and Ripred commends him for his dramatic entrance. He also refers to Hazard as a half-lander, and Gregor figures that means half Overlander and half Underlander. Vicus goes to the boy and introduces himself as his grandfather. Hazard says his grandfather lives in New York City and his mom died before she could take him to visit. Vicus explains to Hazard that he's his other grandfather, Hamnet's dad, and he lives in Regalia. Hazard asks if they're going to visit there, and Vicus chokes up when he says he's always welcome. Gregor wonders why he's never heard of Hamnet before and figures maybe he was banished. Gregor knows people only get banished for doing terrible things, but then he reconsiders when he remembers how he and Ares have been on trial before. Solovet asks Hamnet why he's here 10 years after running off. Gregor wants to know why someone would ever run away from Regalia, since it's pretty much a death sentence, but he feels awkward being here for the family drama.
I think this is also interesting how we've talked a lot about the Shakespearean and that era of English name conventions for the characters. This is one of the more overt ones.
Oh, yes.
With Hamnet being, of course, the name of Shakespeare's often disregarded or beleaguered son. It's incredibly on the nose of yep, that's what this Hamnet is fulfilling in the story as well.
Yeah, it's very heavy-handed, and Hamnet's sister Judith, that's also a name of Shakespeare's child, yeah, so.
Which I guess makes Vicus Shakespeare.
Yeah, I guess so.
Or maybe Vicus plus Solovet, because it's more Solovet who's clearly got the bad blood between her and Hamnet than Vicus and Hamnet.
Yeah, I forgot to like look up the whole like Shakespeare's children thing, but I do know that Hamnet, Judith, and I think maybe also Susanna are Shakespeare's children's names.
And Hamnet was the most well known because of how much they didn't overall get along.
Yeah. And didn't he like die or something?
I don't remember the exact storyline, but
Are you looking it up?
I'm
right
looking
now?
it up if that's cool.
Yeah.
Just because, yeah, he died when he was 11.
Okay, yeah. That's what I was thinking, was that Hamnet was Shakespeare's son who like died young.
But also because of Shakespeare being such a popular and influential playwright, their relationship was like not strongly. It wasn't as strong as it should have been. There's been a lot of conjecture about how before comedies were Shakespeare's primary genre, and then the years after Hamlet's death was when he moved more towards major tragedies.
Oh, interesting. Do we know if Hamlet, like...
That is one of the speculations about how much that play specifically was influenced by Shakespeare's son.
Yeah. So we think that Hamlet was named after Hamnet.
Well, that's mostly, it's not usually the one-to-one parallels. That's usually seen as like not the case. Like it's not that tidy.
Okay.
But it's often like you can pick out bits and pieces that definitely like that seem like there's a connection.
Yeah, I feel like we could also make connections from Hamnet, the Underlander, to Hamlet, the Shakespearean character. I would need to think more about that, though. I think I'm gonna end up doing like a Shakespeare bonus episode, just because there's so many references to Shakespeare in this. Did you see was Judith and Susanna are also
I did not.
Shakespeare's kids?
Yep, Susanna, Hamnet, and Judith. Yep.
There you go. That's pretty bold of Solivet and Vicus to name their kids after Shakespeare's kids.
I mean, I guess, what was it, 1600s?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that would have been like, because Shakespeare was like the turn of the 16th century.
Yeah.
So, or the turn of the 17th century, turn of the
Yeah.
17th century.
Yeah, it was pretty...
So, it would have been fresh in their minds.
That would have been pop culture for them.
Yeah.
There's a ton of Underlanders named after Shakespeare characters, so we know that they were fans of his.
It's mostly, it feels like Shakespearean characters or Greek or Roman mythology.
Yeah, the Greek mythology too. I am definitely going to do a bonus episode about Greek and Roman mythology in the series. Hamnet explains that when he was leaving Regalia 10 years ago, Nerissa made him swear to be here at this time and told him he'd be with a Hisser and a Halflander child. This has always been my question. How did Hamnet keep track of time in the jungle? Like, especially when there's no sun in the Underland. How did he keep track so exactly? Even when he was like, later we find out that he was like kind of driven mad. So like, even when he was really struggling to like hang on to reality in the jungle, he kept track of what day it was.
How do any of the Underlanders keep track of time? Do they ever mention that?
I imagine that in Regalia they have clocks or something that keep track of time. But like, I don't know how he would in the jungle.
Maybe he just had a nice pocket watch.
Yeah, maybe he had a watch.
In his lizard jacket all the time.
Yeah, he just made sure to keep it wound up and everything.
What I like, when he's talking about this, how like it happened all those years ago, at first, he eventually does name drop Nerissa, but at first I think he just says like, many years ago, a little girl told me about this.
Yeah.
So that is what it is implying to me more like, okay, yes, he was Nerissa's uncle at the time, but like...
Actually, they're not actually related.
That's right. So that's even more so like, it's like they don't really have that strong of a relationship. So I think it would make sense that Nerissa wouldn't have picked up on the idea of, oh, this is like a sore point for the family.
That makes sense, yeah. Definitely they would have been like in the same circles, especially since Lux's parents were married by then. Because Luxa was like 2 when Hamnet ran away or something. Because Nerissa's on Lux's dad's side and Hamnet is on Lux's mom's side. So
That's right.
They're not actually related to each other, but they would have been around each other. But yeah, that makes sense that like Nerissa wouldn't, especially, I mean, she was also a kid, but like she maybe wouldn't have heard all of the drama there. Hamnet asks if Nerissa is still alive, and Ripred breaks the news to him that she's queen now. Solivet tells Hamnet that his twin sister Judith and her husband, Luxa's parents, were killed by rats, and Luxa is missing and presumed dead. Solivet adds that Hamnet has no right to mourn them since he turned his back on them. Hamnet says, "You do not command me, mother. Not what I do, not what I think, and never what I mourn." Which is raw. Like, you tell her, Hamnet.
Honestly, at this point, Solivet's really emerging as, like, the villain, as the closest thing to a villain we have for this book. Just because, like, it's not like the Bane, where they're seeking the Bane. It's not like they're trying to rescue Gregor's dad from the rats. They're trying to find a cure, and Solivet's the one making it harder at every turn.
I know,
She
right?
doesn't want to give the powder to the rats. She doesn't want to work with Hamnet here. She doesn't want this mission to go well, it seems.
Yeah.
Like, she's almost like she would rather everybody die.
Yeah, I have a few notes on that later, but you're right that, like, she is actually kind of the antagonist right now. She's the only one that's, like, preventing them from doing this thing, aside from, like, if we want to talk about, like, the environment of the Underland, or, like, the plague is the antagonist, but, like...
In terms of, like, individualized characters, even just, like, individual, like, forces in the equation.
Yeah.
She's the root cause of things at this point. Not the root cause, but, like, the driving cause.
Yeah, and, like, even Lapblood and Mange, even though, like, we don't like them at this point, because they're mean, even they're being more rational about the Hamnet thing. Like, later Mange calls Solivet out on being so difficult.
They're willing to collaborate at this point because they recognize it's in their own best interest.
Right, and Solivet just doesn't give a shit about that. This thing about how Hamnet says she doesn't control what he does, thinks, and never what he mourns, also has a lot to do with what we learn about Hamnet later, which is, like, he was kind of accidentally, kind of on purpose, the cause of a lot of death, and I think he was mourning that, and Solivet was like, you can't, because I told you to do this thing. I'm not talking around it, like, we've read this book. He, like, breaks the dam that is holding the, like, river or something out of the Garden of the Hesperides, and the flood ends up killing a whole bunch of rats and also humans and bats. And, like, we learn that Hamnet loses his bonded bat in that, and, like, Ripred's family dies in that, is something that we learn in book 5. So Hamnet probably has, like, a ton of guilt about that, and he's probably mourning all of that death. But Solivet, like, asked him to do that, and she doesn't give a shit that all those people died.
Nope.
So I think that he's not just talking about this here, like, Solivet telling him that he can't mourn his dead sister, which is fucked up, by the way. Like,
oh yeah, no, that's ridiculously cruel.
Yeah, that's just really cruel that Solivet is like, well, you ran away, so, like, you don't get to mourn them. It's like, no, you can't say that to a person. You can't control that. So Hamnet is totally right here, but I think that he's also thinking back to 10 years ago and their conflict back then as well. Lapblood breaks up the drama by asking if Hamnet's their guide, and the Nars explain the Prophecy of Blood quest to him. Hamnet asks where their warrior is, and Ripred says, over there with his boots in the bones. Cut to Gregor trying to quietly get his feet unstuck from a rib cage. Hamnet asks if they're sure he's the warrior, and Ripred says he's been through 2 prophecies already, and although he's more competent than he seems, he's cocky. When Ripred mentions Gregor possibly being a rager, Hamnet says, a warrior and a rager, my mother's dream come true, which is not said kindly. Like, Hamnet immediately hates Gregor because of this, which is unfair, and later we're gonna, like, reconcile that, but Gregor is immediately like, man, fuck you, to both Ripred and Hamnet for this.
This is what, again, like, I feel so bad for Gregor. He's like a tween boy.
I know,
and he's getting yelled at by a grown man about this.
Yeah, literally. Like, can we just give Gregor a fucking break?
No.
Never.
No, he's made to suffer.
Yep, truly. Yeah, while I was taking my notes last night for these chapters, I was just, like, tempted to write, can we just leave Gregor alone? He's going through a lot right now.
Leave him alone.
Gregor thinks again about how Twitchtip described ragers as natural-born killers, which he definitely doesn't want to be. Hamnet tells him being a rager will make his trip through the jungle difficult, and references his, quote, powers sarcastically. Gregor snaps back that he hopes Hamnet knows where he's going, but Hamnet hasn't agreed to be their guide. The narration says, Gregor felt like he'd spent about half this trip mouthing off to somebody, but everybody just kept messing with him. Which is, like, true.
True.
You really can't blame him for having so many emotions.
He just wants to save his mom and his best friend.
Yeah, it's everyone else who's, like, telling him that he's the warrior and he has to do all this shit. Hamnet turns to leave with Hazard and Frill, but Mange and Lapblood yell at Solivet about how ridiculous it is that her own son won't help her cure the plague and how she thinks she doesn't need anyone's help. But, like, actually, I was thinking about this, and Solivet is right that she doesn't need anyone's help to cure the plague because she's already got her doctors working on it back in Regalia. Because at the end of this book, we're going to find out that Solivet ordered the plague to be created by doctors, and they're going to get back to Regalia and find that the doctors have also created a cure while they were out in the jungle. So Solivet knows full well that she actually doesn't need Hamnet's help or anyone's help. She doesn't need the rats' help because she knows that they can have a cure all on their own, which is probably why, part of the reason why she's so reluctant to work with anybody on this quest. Mange is about to start a fight, but then Hamnet flips a guard on his back and steals his sword. He throws the sword at Mange's feet and it sticks in the stone. Mange and Lapblood end up falling in a heap, and when a guard tries flying down at them, Hamnet jumps up and yanks him off his bat. Gregor is impressed by how Hamnet just stopped the fight without anyone getting hurt. He looks at Ripred, and the rat says, "I knew he'd take care of it." Remember when we were talking about how short the list of people Ripred respects is?
Yeah.
I think Hamnet is probably at the top of that list.
Yeah, I'd agree.
I think that Ripred probably really admires Hamnet for his ability to, like, tell Solivet to fuck off and, you know, just go live his truth out in the jungle.
Probably in that order.
Yeah, yeah. But also, clearly, Hamnet is, like, this really skilled fighter.
Right.
Because he just, like, disarmed everyone in 5 seconds, which is really impressive.
Yeah.
And Ripred is just like, I knew he'd handle it. Like, that's great.
Which he probably did know he'd handle that.
Yeah.
But, like, that doesn't mean he's not pleased with it.
Yes. Yeah. I think that line kind of speaks to maybe there being, like, a past friendship between them. I'm not sure. Hamnet says, "Nothing ever changes, does it?" Solivet replies, "You changed, or why does that gnar still live?" Hamnet just offers her the guard's sword and asks, "Why do you, for that matter?" And she says, "Because I never cease fighting." And this is, like, rich in thematic vibes. Just the fact that Solivet is like, fighting is the only way to stay alive, and Hamnet is the exact opposite of that. Her perspective is like, I'm more powerful, I'm more able to fight. But, like, Hamnet has clearly survived out here, and later we're gonna learn that he doesn't fight. So this is, I feel like, kind of setting up a lot of what we learn later about Hamnet and Solivet. I'm really looking forward to getting to more Hamnet backstory. Vicus interrupts them and begs them to stop. He explains the gravity of the plague to Hamnet and asks him to be their guide. Hazard says Hamnet knows where the Vineyard of Eyes is and points out that he could talk to the bats and crawler. Then he asks, "Is he really your father, like you're my father?" Hamnet hesitates before confirming that he is and agreeing to take them to the vineyard, as long as Solivet and her bat don't come with. I love this part where Hazard is like, "Is he your father, like you're my father?" Because that's just, like, reminding Hamnet who this is and, like, what he means to him.
It's a good line also that, like, works in the context. It doesn't strain believability. Like, that's what would actually convince Hamnet to agree to this. More than, like, anything anyone else in the other crew would say, it has to come from Hamnet.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even Ripred, who, like we've mentioned, like, they probably did have a friendship at some point, at least that's the vibes. Like,
right.
Ripred wasn't going to be able to say anything to persuade Hamnet to do this.
Yes, but Hazard is the one to do it.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. It has to come from Hazard being like, why wouldn't you help them? You know where that is. Like, Hazard is the best. God, I love this book. There are so many good characters on this quest. Just as Hazard starts to ask if Solivet is Hamnet's mother, Hamnet tells everyone not going on the quest to clear out. Before they leave, Vicus hugs Hamnet and tells him he could always come home and he wouldn't have to fight. Hamnet starts to disagree, but Vicus tells him to think of what would happen to Hazard if something were to happen to Hamnet. Foreshadowing! Finally, Vicus asks, "What do you do here that you could not do there?" And Hamnet replies, "I do no harm, I do no more harm." Which, we're gonna come back to that quote later in this book, because Gregor thinks about it again when we learn more about Hamnet. But I just thought I'd point it out there, because it's a really characterizing moment for Hamnet. This whole chapter is just, like, so good at introducing Hamnet's character. I could do, like, a whole episode on just, like, this perfect character intro. Vicus accepts this answer from Hamnet, says "Fly you high to no one in particular," and he and Solivet leave. Ripred expresses relief that the family drama is over, and Hamnet agrees. He asks if his other sister, Susanna, is dead too, and Ripred says no, and she has lots of children now. Gregor confirms that he knows one of them, Howard, and Hamnet says he was Hazard's age when he left Regalia, so about 7. Hamnet asks, so how is he, Rager? Gregor's admiration for Hamnet evaporates, and he reveals that Howard has the plague, but he'll say hi when he gets back if Howard's still alive. Ripred smacks Gregor on the back of his head with his tail and tells him to watch it. Gregor shuts up, acknowledging that he doesn't know the whole story with Hamnet. The narration says, maybe Gregor should find out what had happened. Or maybe, now here was an idea, maybe he should just mind his own business and get on with finding the cure. I love this part. Or maybe, now here was an idea.
Gregor has to be the bigger man yet again.
Yeah. I mean, I always love when Gregor thinks of mouthing off and then stops himself.
He's so observant.
He's very observant and he's very considerate, not always in like a kind way, but he's always like reading the room and like seeing, oh, maybe I shouldn't say this. This might have like a bad reaction.
I love how he clocked that Hazard was a Halflander immediately. Like, even before they mentioned he was a Halflander, he's like, oh wait, this kid is clearly not like the other Underlanders.
Yeah, he's very observant, and even though he has an attitude, he also knows when to reel it in, I feel like. Sometimes he struggles with it, like now he's like under a lot of stress, and like Hamnet and Ripred are being mean to him for no fucking reason. So yes, his attitude is showing. But I think for the most part, Gregor is really good about knowing when to shut up. And I like that that shows in the narration. Hamnet splits the questers into groups to make navigating the jungle safer, and Gregor asks who's in charge of the quest. Ripred says, not you, and that's all you need to know, which makes Hamnet and the rats laugh. Hamnet warns them that the jungle is no place for swords or claws, and they shouldn't eat or trample on the plants. Mange and Lapblood don't seem to believe him, which, well, we'll get to the consequences of that later. The chapter ends with Gregor asking, they can't really eat us, can they? And Hamnet's reply, ask the skeletons.
Good ending line.
Killer line to end on, yeah.
I also love how this is in some way probably the most hostile quest group that Gregor has. Like, his closest ally here, like a genuine ally, is, I mean, I guess Temp, but like more plausibly it's like Ripred. Like, in terms of like anyone who has any real cred in this group, it's Ripred. And even Ripred's like still like also supporting Hamnet. So like Greg is really on his own. Like, before the first book he had more overt support just because it was their quest. Second book he had Luxa, who he'd become good friends with, and also Howard and several others. And this time now he's got Ripred and Temp and then a 2-year-old.
Yeah, you're so right that this is like a really hostile group to be traveling with. Because you're right, like in the first book he had Vicus looking out for him for most of the quest, and then, yeah, book 2, we've got Luxa, we've got Howard, we've got Marith.
We've got Ares.
Twitch Tip. Yeah, like, yeah, that was a very friendly quest group.
Very friendly quest group. And then this one is like, he's got 2 mean rats. He's got Hamnet, who hates him just on principle.
Yeah.
He's got Ripred, who's joining in with the other rats.
Yes.
And then he's got the 2 people in the crew, or creatures in the crew, less respected than he is.
Yes, exactly. Like, Temp and Boots are not bringing a whole lot to the quest.
They're not really going to help back him up or take it. Like, them taking his side is not going to change anything.
Yeah, that's not going to earn him points. I guess Nike, but like, even she is not really involved with standing up for Gregor against the rats. She's friendly, but she's not a friend yet. She's not an ally. He
doesn't really know Nike yet compared to all of the other bats in the previous books. Like, this is basically a new member for him.
Yeah, she's nice, but they don't trust each other yet the same way that like Gregor and Ares did. He is pretty on his own in this one, huh? I never considered that. Yeah, and Ripred is obviously like supportive, and later he is gonna like give good advice about the Rager thing and whatnot. But yeah, right now he's just kind of being like his bully self. But these were quite some chapters.
Oh yes.
I think chapter 13 is like one of the greatest in the whole series, with the entrance of Hamnet and the reveal that Vicus and Solibet are his parents, and that he has this whole tragic backstory that we get later on in this book, but it kind of just sets up a whole lot that goes on in this quest.
He's got a son.
Yeah, the Halflander thing being
Halflander.
introduced. Like, we never meet any other Halflanders in the whole book.
He's the only one.
Yeah.
We haven't even gotten to the jungle yet. Not really.
Not really.
We're still on the outskirts.
But we've got some sinister, warnings about the jungle to be on the lookout for the plants and whatnot.
I had also forgotten just how much time passes between Luxa and the rest of the crew, of the quest crew from the last book vanishing before their reintroduction. Like, we've been like over half a book in total, I think, at this point, because when did they seemingly die in the last book? Like, I want to say like maybe chapter 20, like maybe a little bit into the start of Act 3.
I think, into the start of Act 3 would have been like 20 to 23.
Because it's nine chapters per book, or per part in each book. So it's been maybe around 20 chapters in total.
Yeah.
Counting the last book and this one, and they're still just kind of presumed dead. I mean, again, I don't know how, like, they haven't hammered it home that, like, there hasn't been a lot of saying, like, definitively from their perspective, oh, we think Luke's is dead. So I think it's not a huge shock when they show up, but just the fact that there's not a ton of hope that they are alive.
Right.
And that she lets it drag on for so long.
Yeah.
Like, I feel Luke's absence in this book so far.
Absolutely.
Like, this is the first time, like, she hasn't been here. And, like, you can feel it.
Yeah, I agree. Especially when Gregor notices how similar Hamnet and Luxa are, which comes up later once we get Luxa on the quest and she meets Hamnet.
We already had the parallels of the ball.
Yeah.
And that he even, like, notices, like, he's like, oh, that's a very Luxa thing to do.
Yeah.
But not quite as arrogant.
Exactly. And it's like Hamnet is doing, like, the kinder version of what Luxa did.
But he's even meaner to Gregor at first.
Yeah, he's got beef with Gregor, yeah. Oh my god. Yeah, Hamnet is, like, one of the characters of all time. I can't wait to learn more about him throughout this book. He's definitely, like, the star of this book, I think. He's just got so much going on, and we learn so much about him and all of his different relationships with the different characters, like Ripred and Luxa and Solovet and Vicus is just, like, so fascinating to me. And then, even after this book, his presence is felt. Gregor keeps thinking back to him, even after this book, when Hamnet's no longer around. He kind of, like, gives this advice to Gregor that sticks with him throughout the rest of the series. It kind of carries him through the end of the books. Yeah, it's really good. Love Hamnet, love Hazard, love Frill. Love the whole quest group in this book, honestly. Well, thanks so much for joining me, John.
As always, thanks for having me.
Of course. Next week's episode will cover chapters 14 and 15. Don't forget to check out our stickers and t-shirts at redbubble.com/people/return to regalia. Thank you for listening, and until next time, fly you high.
Fly you high.